What is up, awesome tubers? Welcome to the Nightmare Show, a brand new show here on the David Awesome channel where I talk to you about creepy topics and we discover new and scary things together. If you like creepy stuff and you like learning about new and creepy and scary things that make the hairs on your arms stand up, then you are at the right place. And today we are going to be talking about the creepiest ghost stories and legends from World War II. And I'm getting this information off Ranker.com. With that being said, let's start down the list, and I hope you enjoyed this video. I'm going to make this Nightmare Show into a series on my channel. I'm going to make a playlist out of it, so if you want to go check out my playlist, it will be on there. I'm going to add all the old scary videos I've already done to it, but it now has an official name. This is the Nightmare Show. If you're new to the channel, please hit that subscribe button, and I would greatly appreciate it. And if you're a current subscriber, I appreciate that as well. Thank you for taking the time to subscribe to my channel and watch my videos. Now, with that being said, let's get to the scariest World War II stories. Number 1 is the missing children. This story comes from Reddit user Igloo444. Their grandfather was a member of the British Army and was stationed in a remote village in the Swiss Alps during the winter of 1943. The village quickly got snowed in, and all the telephone lines were out, the roads were blocked, and the whole battalion was just stuck in the Swiss Alps for the entire winter. Most of the villagers only spoke German, and most of the soldiers only spoke English. So when the soldiers were out at a local bar one night and a man began yelling, "Where take you the children?" at them, they were pretty confused. They rounded up a translator and took the man back to the base, where he told them that since their arrival, several small objects had gone missing. A tarp, some wood, a halberd, which is similar to an axe, and then the children started disappearing. If it had just been one child, they probably would have written it off as a weird or tragic incident. They were, after all, stuck in the mountains, surrounded by snow and wild animals, but 3 kids? The captain told the villagers that he would continue to look into the matter, and that he would begin sending some of his men to patrol the streets each night looking for whoever, or whatever, was the culprit behind all the strange disappearances. Later that night, Private Rignall disappeared from the barracks. Disappearing children was one thing, but a grown man, it seemed unlikely that an animal, even a wolf, could have taken down a healthy, full-grown man on its own. Naturally, rumors began to surface that there was some sort of monster living in the mountains that came down at night to feast on the occupants of the village. That monster was Donald Trump. No, I'm just joking. So they keep doing nightly patrols. One night, the grandfather and a few other soldiers see a person standing outside the windows of a darkened house peering into it. They shout for the figure to stay put. Instead, it takes off running. They gave chase. Eventually, it jumped into a hidden cave and began targeting them. They returned fire, and when the exchange stopped, they investigated. They found Rignall in the cave, deceased, surrounded by 7 half-eaten children. And number 2, we have ghost planes. After World War II ended, many people saw ghost planes. These fighters aircrafts would appear in the sky, then disappear without a trace. One scary story takes place a year after what occurred at Pearl Harbor. The U.S. Army picked up an incoming plane on their radar. They sent a few pilots out to investigate, and when they came back, the pilot said that they had seen an American combat aircraft, a P-40 to be exact, that looked like it had been through hell. It was pierced with holes, the landing gear was missing, and the pilot was bloody. Then the plane just went down, dropped right out of the sky, and when they went to investigate the site, they found the plane. At number 3, we have Japanese cannibals. Toward the end of the conflict, Japanese soldiers in Singapore and New Guinea began eating captured prisoners of wars, and it is not because they were starving. They were doing it simply because they could and to reinforce their bonds. Sometimes the prisoners were deceased when the Japanese began to hack off their flesh, but sometimes they were still alive. At 4, we have Man in the Attic. In Colmar, France, a young woman experienced something strange in the summer of 1991. Her family had just moved into a new house, and she found a hole in the wall of the attic. Though the hole, she could see another room, but as far as she could tell, it had no door. She felt something strange coming from the hole, but didn't investigate. Later, she went back with the flashlight and saw something. There was a young man sitting on the floor, his knees against his chest. His arms were crossed on his knees, like he was hugging himself. He turned his head towards us and smiled. We bolted out of the room and went to the storage room. My heart was pounding. I was out of breath. I first thought that it was a real person, but he had no color. It was like a 3D dark show, and we never heard any footstep. My friend refused to admit that we saw a ghost, and we never talked about it. My grandmother learned later that our house was a clandestine printing office during World War II. The owners printed slogans against the Germans. But I think that there was something else in that house. I believe that the secret room was used to hide people. At 5, we have the mystery of the L-8 blimp. In 1942, a Navy blimp called the L-8 took off from Treasure Island in the Bay Area on a submarine spotting mission with 2-man crew. A few hours later, it came back to land and coiled into a house in Daly City. Everything on board was in its proper place. No emergency gear had been used, but the crew was gone. They were never found. At 6, we have Ghost of Normandy. One father took a trip through France with his family. He wanted to visit Normandy and see a few sights from World War II. His daughter was 7 years old at the time, and he says that she had, at that point, never been exposed to any history about World War II and didn't know what either side's uniforms looked like. And they returned home. Things got a little odd, he writes. Over the past year, my daughter has often spoke of things or men that she saw looking at her, pointing guns at her, and following her while we were in the bunkers around the Normandy area. She often described them as crouching down, hiding behind corners, holding guns, and looking as if they were very mad. He asked her questions about what she saw. Were you scared? Yes, but I knew they weren't trying to hurt me, so I didn't think anything of it. But were a lot of them everywhere I looked. They were moving around like army men do, kind of crawling but bent over. When we would walk out of the bunker, I would see one in the grass or behind a tree. Then when I was in the car, I could see them looking at me from behind a fence in a field. Sometimes a lot of them, sometimes only 1 or 2. She also described their uniforms perfectly camouflaged and everything. At 7, we have the Alkimos. The SS Alkimos was built as an American ship for use in World War II. It was sold to Norway, which used it for arms transport. In 1944, one of the crew ended the life of a radio operator who worked on the ship. Wadi Steen, the perp that shot himself. Norway covered up the incident and claimed the enemy fire caused Steen's passing. After the conflict, the ship was sold to a Greek shipping company. Strange, unexplained incidents kept happening when the ship, in 1963, it coiled into a reef off the coast of Australia. It was towed to Fremantle for repairs, but while it was there, the Alkimos caught fire and was to be towed to Hong Kong for more work. It had barely left Fremantle when the tow line snapped and it ran aground. The tow company couldn't get it unstuck, so they left a caretaker on board until something could be done. The caretaker experienced many strange things on board, including feelings of anger, knocking, footsteps, and voices. Over the years, the few companies tried to salvage the ship, but each time someone tried, bad things would happen to their crew. Eventually, it was abandoned and began slowly sinking into the water, where it can still be seen today, if you're brave enough. At 8, we have the Diplomat Hotel. The Diplomat Hotel in WWII City, Philippines, was once a monastery in early 1900s. During World War II. Japanese soldiers invaded the monastery and beheaded all the clerici and nuns. They turned the building into a sanatorium, and after the conflict, it was converted into a hotel. Guests often reported seeing black figures and a woman in white. They also heard screaming and banging in the middle of the night. The hotel is now abandoned and a prime spot for ghost hunters. At number 9, we have Nazi and the Oculate. One former Navy serviceman recounted his chilling experience while he was living aboard a barge in Norfolk. In 1999, he and another crew member shared a fondness for World War II history, so his friend gave him a strange book. It was about the Third Reich, trying to find and use occult artifacts to help them win. He writes, "For those not overly religious, the spear of destiny was the spear used by the Roman soldier Longinus to pierce the side of Christ during the crucifixion. The myth went that anyone that possessed Longinus's spear would hold godlike powers. The SS were unstable enough to believe in that stuff. One night, he was reading the book before going to bed. It was a chapter about the Führer Himmler, who led an archaeology team for the SS. After that, he put the book under his pillow and fell asleep. Later that night, he awoke to the sound of slow, heavy footsteps walking through the bunks in the dark. Then the footsteps passed him. All of a sudden, the curtains to my rack began to blow in towards me, and I can't even describe the cold that accompanied it. It was as if a freezing wind was howling in upon me, and I could feel my jaw locked tight, my teeth instantly becoming a solid block of ice that froze and fused together. I grew up in Michigan and never known such a cold in all my life." He heard the footsteps pass him by, and the door to the sleeping compartment opened and closed. Everything returned to normal, and he gave the book back to his friend the next day. At number 10, we have the Sapien Airport. During World War II, the U.S. wrested control of Sapien, an island near Japan, from the Japanese Army. The Japanese Army had built an airport there, and inside the airport were bomb shelters. One woman saw the ghosts of Japanese soldiers inside one of the shelters during a visit to the island. She writes, "As I was standing there right inside the doorway, quietly looking around, the lights suddenly started to get really dim inside the shelter, and I heard a rushing sound in my ears. The rushing sound was like if you put coffee cups over your ears, but much louder. Then a shadow rushed right by me and sat down on the bench seat that was now mounted on the formerly rusted metal sticking out from the wall by me and sat on the bench seats. One shadow would rush to the left room, and the next would rush to the right room. The shadows were rushing by about every second, and if they had both gone the same direction, they would have collided. It looked like they had practiced drills for rushing into the bomb shelter quite a bit before. I could see the shadows that looked like they were made out of gray smoke. I could see their heads and bodies, but not their hands or feet. I saw that they were thin Japanese soldiers." Number 11, we have the Sandakian Death March Ghost. In 1945, Allied forces pushed the Japanese army out of Borneo rather than give up their prisoners. The Japanese army forced thousands of Allied soldiers to march more than 160 miles over the course of a month. Only 6 captors survived. In 2019, Major John Tolich retraced part of their route during along the path of soldiers marched. He took dozens of photos, including one that is eerily reminiscent of hunched-over soldiers marching down the road. Major Tolich says that the illusion was created by a towel on the dashboard of the car. Interesting. By a towel on the dashboard of the car reflecting on the glass of the windshield. Despite the explanation for the picture, he doesn't think it was a coincidence. It took me a few moments to work out how it had occurred, but it was too weird for words. I showed it to several people, and they said it is quite extraordinary. Some even refused to look at it because it was so haunting. At 12, we have sorry about that, Awesome Tubers. I got a little off kilter there, but anyways. At number 12, we have the Headless Gringa. During World War II, the U.S. Army set up a base in the Galapagos Islands. According to a legend, a soldier and his girlfriend were living at the base. The soldier found out that she was cheating on him, so he pushed her off a cliff, ending her life. But despite how gruesome that is, it gets worse. As she fell, her head got caught between some rocks and she was decapitated. The soldier covered up the incident, but the woman still haunts the island, appearing as a vengeful spirit to men who are alone at night. At 13, we have a ghost in Islington. Rosina French lived in the London borough of Islington. During the darkest days of World War II, both she and her husband performed separate duties to help aid the country in the fight against Adolf Hitler. In fact, French was a volunteer firefighter. She couldn't serve on the front lines, but she was part of a rotation that checked for bomb threats and traveling fires. It was during one of her night shifts that she encountered an allegedly supernatural force while standing at her post. French noticed a strangely shiny white figure. At first she thought it was a gravestone or person, but the apparition was too tall to be either. She realized the creature must be a ghost when she began to feel her hair stand on end. The figure did not approach the woman or harm her, as the story is told by French's son Alan. It was when she peered more to the left, where she had possibly not glanced before, she experienced what must have been one of the most frightening sights in her life. There it was, a very tall, shiny white figure, such a conspicuous contrast to the surrounding area's darkness. The apparition was too tall for the average tombstone, but more alarmingly, it was also too tall for a living human being. The sighting was so eerie, it must be a ghost. What other explanation could there be? It was definitely a phantom-like figure. Oh dear, the possible reality of the situation had started to sink in despite her fear. She nervously accepted that she was witnessing a special sighting. A supernatural experience was not one that she wished. My mother was of a nervous disposition, in fact. She could be sometimes exceptionally highly strung. Looking at a ghost whilst performing fire watching duty from her doorstep was not what she needed. She required something to calm her down. She could utter no sound for her vocal cords to become useless. She could not move, she could only stand. She claimed that she actually felt the hairs on her head move. My mother firmly believed that they were stiffening and standing on their ends. That is how terrified she was. Well, awesome tubers, that's the end of our list. I hope you enjoyed this video of the creepiest ghost stories and legends from World War II. This is the Nightmare Show. Like I said, I got this information off ranker.com. Hope you enjoyed this episode of the Nightmare Show. Until next time, stay scary, awesome tubers, and I'll be back to fill your nightmares with more nightmare fuel.